In just over half a year, McLaren has gone from having Formula One's benchmark car to lagging 3 months behind the development curve of the factory Mercedes team. McLaren's hopes of defending either of its championships are now slim without a serious turnaround, one that won't start to arrive until just before the summer break. We'll explain more about McLaren's plan to recover later in this video, but first we need to establish what exactly has gone wrong and how McLaren picked the wrong development path for 2026. After all, McLaren's technical department was walking on water in the second half of the ground effect era, having risen from being one of F1's slowest teams at the start of 2023 to winning back-to-back Constructors' Championships and the Drivers' Championship last year. But it was during that 2025 championship success that the seeds of McLaren's 2026 deficit were sown. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella admitted that being in the thick of an intense 2025 title fight with Red Bull definitely had an impact on the 2026 car. Even though McLaren wasn't constantly upgrading its 2025 car, Stella says the car still needed some of our attention, especially as the threat of Max Verstappen stealing away the driver's title from it grew. McLaren also made missteps with the early development choices it made for 2026 last year. Stella phrased this as concept directions that McLaren is now redirecting from, a technical way of saying McLaren made design mistakes. These aren't disastrous design mistakes like those made at Aston Martin or Williams, but clearly McLaren's recognised there's more development potential by taking a different direction. Realising that, later than the likes of Mercedes, has put the team 2 to 3 months behind on development. It's also put McLaren out of sync with its F1 rivals in terms of upgrades, meaning it appeared closer to the pace when it debuted a big upgrade across Miami and Montreal, that then fell back as the other top teams brought their own upgrades, with Stella estimating each big upgrade is worth about 3/10. And the worst setbacks with what McLaren did bring, as a new front wing debuted in Montreal, didn't race until 2 rounds later in Barcelona. Plus it had to abandon plans to trial its version of Ferrari's upside down rear wing in Austria because it wasn't confident it would work properly. Every team is restricted to the same $215 million cost cap for 2026, so McLaren not only has to match its rivals in the development race, it has to outdevelop them significantly to overturn that 3-month deficit. And that's not easy, as the only customer among the top 4 teams, especially when its engine is lagging behind the factory Mercedes in multiple ways. McLaren's customer team deficit to Mercedes in terms of power unit exploitation was well documented at the start of the season. But much like car development, while McLaren has made strides to match where Mercedes started the season, the works team has continued to raise the bar. The race revealed during the Silverstone weekend that Mercedes had found a new, legal way of utilising the benefits of an engine trick that had previously been banned by the FIA. Mercedes was practicing and perfecting this on the simulator ahead of the Silverstone weekend, but it came as a surprise to McLaren, which only found out when Mercedes started doing it on Friday. Mercedes is under no obligation to give a heads up to its customer team, and you can't blame it for not wanting to hand everything to a team that's beaten it for the last 2 years. Power unit exploitation is so difficult in 2026 because factory and customer teams can have the same hardware, but knowing the best things to input is a big advantage when it comes to deployment output. Naturally, as the engine manufacturer, Mercedes is going to have the best grasp of what to input. McLaren's also scratching its head around its straight-line speed weakness. It's partly explained by a draggy car, more on that later, but not solely. Stella's always very keen to compliment the brilliant Mercedes product, but at the same time he said there are question marks over how exactly McLaren is so far off on the straights. The data shows Lando Norris being 11 km an hour slower than Antonelli on the flat-out run to Copse Corner at Silverstone. And Norris was 9 km slower than Russell on the run to the Turn 4 right-hander in Austria. Stella wondered whether some of those gains could be explained by McLaren being on an older specification of power unit. Another marginal gain is the latest Mercedes engine specification introduced in Austria, which both Alpine's and Carlos Sainz's Williams have, but neither McLaren driver has. We understand this is because there's still so much mileage left on the McLaren driver's power units that swapping to a fresh power unit at this stage wouldn't make sense. That's a consequence of the reliability problems McLaren suffered earlier in the year, including 2 different battery problems that left neither driver able to start in China. That upgraded Mercedes power unit has added reliability improvements across a number of its components. Mercedes didn't even need to spend any of the ADWO tokens it earned from being judged to be more than 2% adrift of the supposed benchmark Red Bull power unit. It wasn't a performance upgrade, but stronger reliability means Mercedes can run its power units more aggressively, unlocking an extra edge that McLaren currently doesn't have. Another element of the power unit that McLaren's behind on is gear ratios. McLaren has opted for slightly shorter gear ratios than Mercedes this year, which means its drivers are reaching the higher gears more frequently and shifting up earlier than the Mercedes in many corners, as this example from Montreal clearly shows. Those gear ratios are locked in before the season starts and are chosen based on the estimate of the expected power unit performance and energy deployment. Again, Mercedes as the engine constructor will have the best idea of where to pitch their gear ratios. McLaren's was a best case estimate, but it's proven to be suboptimal. Teams are allowed to use a joker and change their gear ratios mid-season, but we understand McLaren won't do that because of the cost involved. Changing their gear ratios would essentially cost McLaren some development budget it then can't put towards the car, and more development for its car is sorely needed. Silverstone gave us the first proper hints of frustration among the McLaren drivers. Having qualified nearly 8/10 off pole position on Saturday, twice the deficit he had in sprint qualifying, Norris said, "I'm not an engineer, I just drive the car," when asked why the deficit had grown. He was baffled at how he managed to finish fourth in the Grand Prix and didn't hold back after the race, calling it not a nice car to drive, maybe one of the hardest cars I've ever driven in F1. One of the McLaren's biggest weaknesses is it has a really draggy car. It's why it was so keen to deliver its own version of Ferrari's upside down rear wing that could help reduce the impact of it when in straight mode. That draggy car will also be feeding into its straight line speed weakness too, but McLaren has also been lacking downforce compared to the Mercedes since the start of the season. It's why Stella split the gap into probably 70% in the corners and 30% in the straights. Silverstone exposed where McLaren is weak according to Oscar Piastri, as McLaren's more vulnerable than the Mercedes to tough conditions, such as unpredictable wind direction. The car also struggles to generate temperature with harder tyre compounds on colder tracks, like at Silverstone. McLaren even has to make improvements in how it estimates fuel consumption, as it miscalculated the fuel Norris's car needed for the Silverstone sprint, having done the same in Austria. McLaren's Mercedes power unit has proved thirstier than expected over the past couple of weekends, so it needs to get on top of what Stella admitted was a relatively simple matter. Stella says the team now has a clear development direction to pursue, but it will take a couple of months to be realised. It's why the Belgian GP will likely be more of the same as McLaren's Silverstone struggles. The first results of the redirected approach will appear just before the summer break at the Hungarian Grand Prix, but McLaren doesn't expect the truly transformative upgrades to arrive until after the summer break. Stella is also wary of how successful the upgrades of Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull have been, all instantly delivering an improvement in performance. Stella even picked out new team Cadillac and its successful Austrian GP upgrade as evidence for F1 teams are operating at a level that has never been the case before. So McLaren knows it will have to be at the top of its development game if it's to have any hope of rescuing its defence of either championship.